very good. So what are some of those things, right? Well, we've got a lot of counterpoint going on in this piece. There's a lot of speed involved because it's a dance of sorts. It's supposed to have some sort of tempo to it. And we've got a lot of lines moving at once. We've got bass lines, we've got the melody that are all moving at the same speed at certain points in this piece, even though it's less than 2 minutes long. So what I'm going to be trying to bring you through here today is just some of the ideas that will help make this a little bit more simple to approach. I've also got a lot of fingerings written in here to help you navigate this piece. Those are just suggestions, of course. You'll see this played in a number of different ways. That being said, I'm going to show you some of the ways that I think might benefit you and show you some alternatives as well. And also, for those that are newer in their classical guitar and fingerstyle sort of experience here, I'm going to show ways to simplify this as well. Maybe taking out some of the bass notes, simplifying, and making the texture a little bit more easy to handle. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started. I played for you just the start of it there. It's not much longer than that, right? It's a 2-minute piece. But there is a lot going on in the B section, whereas the A section, which is the point leading up to measure 8, actually, it's only 8 measures long, right? It's fairly short, whereas the B section is quite a bit longer. Okay, so let's take a look. It starts out with this pickup measure of just 1 beat, right? This. And then we've got beat 1, right? So what do we do there? One of the things you really don't want to do is start out slamming the guitar, playing as loud as you possibly can, because it absorbs a lot of energy and it doesn't musically make sense. The thing we want to do musically right here in the beginning is lead to beat 1. We don't want to make this sound like beat 1. This is leading to beat 1. Right? So we do that by playing these just a little bit quieter. It also saves our hands a little bit of stress too. We don't want to start out squeezing so much. So the way I'm fingering this, as you can see written here, is 3 and open, and then 1 and 2 here, followed by 4 and 0, this open E string. Now, you will see a lot of people playing it like this, barring this 2nd fret for this F sharp, these 2 F sharps, right? It's not something I choose to do because this bar feels kind of clunky and it's hard to make it legato. But if you're well versed in bar chords, it might be something that you at least try. I would try it regardless, right? Try a couple of different ways and see what works for you. The main thing we want to avoid here is making any finger jump, right? So there's a couple of options that are worse than others, but these are 2 that you might consider, right? So the one that's written on the page, or 3 and 0, then just borrowing that 2nd fret, and then using your 2nd finger up here on the G. So if you choose that first option, the one that I'm recommending here, it means that you have to do quite a bit of stretch with your 1st finger to your 2nd finger here, from the 6th to the 1st string. And actually, that's going to be something that you're going to have to keep on touching on throughout this piece, because there's a lot of stretches in the left hand here. So as we move through this, I'm going to suggest a couple of different exercises to help you achieve those stretches a little bit easier. This is not easy by any means. So you can notice what's going on here. I have 3 on the 6th string, and then 2 having to go way up here. That's already a stretch. And then you've got a stretch between these 2 fingers, right? So it's first here, and then here, just on the first 2 notes of the entire piece. So how do we make that more manageable, and how do we make that easier? Maybe you're able to accomplish it now, but you're having to do one of these and like really stress to get to the notes. Well, the basic thing that's happening here is our fingers having to traverse the fingerboard in opposing motion here, right? There's a lot of this going on throughout the piece, whether it's with our 1st and 2nd finger, our 3rd and 2nd, or 3rd and 4th, whatever it is. We've got to teach our fingers to be able to do that, and they've got to get the mobility and the strength to do those types of things. But you start out small. You don't start out by doing big stretches like that. You start out with something like doing that same thing on the 4th and 3rd string, like this. And then all you do is you expand out 1 string. So now I'm on the 4th and 2nd string. Right? And then maybe you do 5th and 2nd string. And then maybe you expand to 6th and 1st string. But maybe if that's too hard, you just stick with these guys for a little while. And then you could always go to 2nd and 6th string, not necessarily the full 6 to 1, or 1st and 5th, right? And that's a great way to start up a warm-up or get into a practice routine throughout the day, is just start really small and eventually work your way up to those bigger stretches. Your hands will feel a lot more comfortable, even if that's something you've done before. So try that exercise if this very beginning is difficult for you. If you can't get this stretch in the beginning, no matter either of those ways, you could just start out like this. You see what I did there? I just didn't play the bass notes. And then you join in at a point that's a little bit more manageable for you. Okay, let's move on. So we've got these first 2 notes leading to beat 1, right? That can be just done with a slight crescendo, right? So I've got 4 and open here. Then, fortunately, we've got 8th notes here that aren't followed with like another bass note here. It's not that. It's just F, E, and then we catch D sharp with B here. So after that, pretty simple. We've got finally 2 open strings, right? After all of this work, here, our left hand gets some time to move, but right, we don't take it off the guitar, we don't leave it frozen in its position. We start moving the next finger to where it needs to go. So let's practice from the middle of that first measure there, the D sharp against the B here in the bass, and see if we can practice this motion. So see, I'm bringing my first finger a little bit closer to the 1st string during that free space, right? Those open notes. And then we've got another open note here, but our 3rd finger is going to move all the way down to this G. It's not too bad. You know, whenever you have an open note involved, you've got at least a little bit of freedom of motion. So we're going to take advantage of that at every moment that we can in this piece because of its difficulty, right? So again, we've got another 2 open notes here. Before we had A and E, right, on measure 1. We don't count that pickup measure, by the way. So measure 1, we've got A and E. And then on measure 2, we've got both E's. So we're going to use the bar chord here. This is simple to do the bar chord. Otherwise, you have to do this. A little bit more difficult. And you see what happens, like I just did there. You miss it sometimes. So I use a bar chord here. But if not, you can try this 1 and 2. You were just doing that here, right? But when you did it here, you didn't have to go and stretch like you do here for this D sharp in measure 2. So anyways, the other way to do is 1 and 2 and then 4 open. You can try that. I like using this bar. You'll also see people do this. Use open E here, which is also lovely. It's really nice to keep it on the melody all on the 2nd string there. Something to think about. I kind of like that, but why not take advantage of this open string here? Just make sure it's not very bright. That's what I'm trying to control here. Okay, so it's 4, 1, 3, and 0 here. So that G against B, and then we've got this new rhythmic figure, a quarter note followed by 2/8, followed by quarter, followed by 2/8. We've got this repeating pattern. And then the harmonic rhythm speeds up a little bit there. Okay, so what are we doing here? The important thing is to make sure the bass line connects. This, listen to the bass line. Now, it's very unrealistic to try to just connect the bass line without practicing the bass line alone, because how are we supposed to do both together and focus on one thing while we're doing both together? It's almost impossible, I'll tell you that. So something you can practice is going. Okay? And when you practice it, don't just plunk out the notes like it doesn't matter and you're doing something that's just work. Try to make it have a musical voice of its own. Right? Here's me not caring about it and just saying, okay, well, this is what I'm supposed to practice, right? Right? There's nothing to that. There's nothing about the music that's going to make that interesting, even when I add in another voice. So I'm going to try to do something with this. See, I played with the dynamics a little bit. As I rose up in this line, I crescendoed, I got a little bit louder. Then I did a little swell there as well. So I got louder and then quieter. So you can try that. And I'm also trying to preserve the actual fingering that I'm going to be using when I play both lines together there, because that way your hands don't get confused once you add everything in, right? So now once I do this, it's actually going to come together a lot better, right? So practice this bass line as much as you really need to. So it gets a little trickier once you add this, right? But that's the nature of it. You can't focus on both things at once, so you might as well practice that bass line. Okay, now how about practicing just the treble line alone, the melody, right? So I'm just practicing from this third measure into the fourth, right? So keep in mind, if you're buzzing notes here, or if you're not able to quite get it, or you're thinking it's a little confusing without playing it all together, then you really have to practice that alone, right? Because it shouldn't be more confusing just because the line is by itself, unless you're changing all of the fingerings. That does make it confusing, or trying it in a new position, like if you were doing this. Of course, that makes it a little bit more confusing. But if it's all the original positions, all you're doing is clarifying where you need to work. It's not making it more confusing. Trust me, something I've learned over time here. Just try practicing these alone and making them really great. Then the bass line, right? And keep in mind, saying, okay, I can do both of those now, and then trying to play them all together doesn't necessarily work out like that. Maybe you can try just a couple of something like that, just a couple of beats, right? I like that little section. And when you do that, what you can focus on is trying to hear all of the things that you are working on there, right? Your little slight crescendo in the bass line, and the shaping you were doing in the melody, which actually ends up being the same. Right? So when you just have a little section like this, you actually can focus on both at once you've done the work and understood both of the lines equally as well. Right? Okay, so moving on from there. So this becomes a tricky part, and yes, you basically do have to play it all with your thumb, that eighth note line. It's not an unreasonable tempo to ask the thumb to play, but what you are going to see a lot of is a tendency to do this with your arm when you play that line with your thumb, which if you do that makes it really impossible to play the upper line when it comes back in. There's going to be a lot of different mistakes. So something you can do if you have a mirror, or maybe if you're in front of your computer right now, you can open up something like Zoom or something where you can see a mirror image of yourself playing. Obviously, you can just get a little $6 or $7 mirror and set it in front of your desk. That's what I really recommend you do here, so that you can see everything working together here. And with your thumb, make sure that's not working, right? Make sure it's not working. Now, make sure it's not bouncing like this. Right? See if you can make that motion all be happening from this large joint right here that your thumb starts at. So you can focus that thumb movement moving like this, right? So not this, like you're playing a video game, not that, but like this, from the larger motion of your thumb. Hopefully you can see that. And that's where I'm trying to get power from when I'm doing several notes at once, not this, right? Not moving my entire arm, because that's going to throw us out of position there. So I'm going to try this line alone, just like I was doing before. And then now I'm going to try it with my middle finger resting up on this first string, because I'm going to be needing to do, right? Or that's the fingering I use here. So I'm going to go, actually I'll just rest my middle finger and index up there at first, and I'll do. Okay, so now I'm going to play along with it. That's just something you might have to work on for a little bit. You could start by doing, so just one note before this gesture that we start the piece with, right? It's the same thing as the very beginning, the pickup measure, right? You can start by just playing the F sharp before it, and then so. Right, and then eventually add in the E, and then the other E that ends the melody from the previous phrase, right? Okay, so that's one of the trickier spots of the piece. Again, just try moving your thumb alone. And if that's still giving you trouble, just try using your thumb in something that you already know. A melody, a scale, an arpeggio. Even if it means writing something. And use a mirror, like I said. Try to play or write something that you don't really need to look too much at the fingerboard, but you can look at yourself in the mirror and see your thumb movement. You know, thumb movement's one of those really important topics that applies to whatever style of guitar that you're playing. Whether you're doing finger picking for, you know, acoustic stuff, or you're applying this to your electric guitar playing, if your thumb is throwing the rest of your hand completely out of whack, then it makes it really difficult to be accurate. So this is one of those things you can focus on. And by the way, if you have any questions about this, sometimes I forget to mention, but you can leave a comment and I will get to your questions and answer as many as possible at the end of this stream. So hope to see some interesting questions here about this stuff. So we're going to move on there. We are at measure 5 is where we'll start here. Here is these is the same notes as the beginning, all the way up until measure 7. So as always, you're going to try to do something different. Maybe you come in a little bit less strong. This piece starts kind of strong, right? This whole... So what about the second time coming in? And making it a little bit of easing up just a little bit. I don't mean making a huge contrast, but maybe easing up a little bit. Maybe that's a nice idea too. So what I'll cover now is this moment at measure 7 where it changes, right? Fairly simple. We've got an open string. D against F sharp here. Of course, there's several ways you can do this. You can do this with 3 and 4. Actually, I think it is easier with 3 and 4, but it depends how well versed you are with these two guys, right? They're a little bit more difficult to control sometimes. But the advantage of that is you're closer to catching this G major chord at the end of that A section. You heard me one of these times through do a little trill here. That's nice to do on the second time through. You don't necessarily have to do trills the first time. But what I'm doing is I'm doing a little trill between the 3rd string and the 2nd string. It's a cross string trill where I'm plucking in rapid succession the 2 strings going from G to F sharp. Another thing you could do is just a nice little ornament here. I'm pulling off from G to F sharp. Right, so that's a little simplified way of doing it. Or you could do a little mordant and play. So F sharp hammer and then pull off to F sharp. Now Bach probably super heavily ornamented all of this. And something that I meant to mention was that this piece likely wasn't written on the lute. And of course now we're playing it on the guitar. But it was likely written on what was called the Lautenwerk, or the lute harpsichord. Basically a keyboard instrument that looked like a lute. It had this belly shape that kind of looked like a lute, right? Or you could imagine like a canoe or something. It looked like that, but then otherwise like a normal keyboard, or more like a harpsichord that plucked the strings. But anyways, that was an instrument that you could do so many more virtuosic things than you can on the guitar, especially with these thicker textures, right? Now, we think that he still likely wrote these for lute or to be played on lute, but we're not entirely sure, especially with this first lute suite, which we have no original copy of, just a copy written out by one of his pupils much later. So, that being said, we have limitations when doing all this ornamentation, and of course we want to still make it beautiful and not just a virtuosic show-off fest, right? So, nevertheless, we repeat this entire thing again. We go back to the beginning. You can see there's a repeat sign. We have the pickup. And that is typically where you would hear tons of different ornaments. I lost my spot, but it's not something that we really need to focus on today. Just something to think about. You can listen to a bunch of different versions of this and see if you can find some areas where you can throw in ornaments. A lot of the spots are going to be where you have open strings and quarter notes, right? So maybe here, that's actually where I meant to play it. There's another spot, maybe. Just a few little ideas there. Okay, so moving on to the B section. Now, as you can see, there's a lot more measures in this B section. The A section has 8 measures, whereas the B section has a whole lot more, right? You can just see visually on the page. It also gets into a little bit more complex harmony. And that's exciting because it's a very simple introduction, almost like how you would imagine in a dance, right? It's very simple in the beginning, and then it gets more and more difficult. And now, while this is written based off of like a Bouree is like a type of French dance, at least that's the origins of it. This isn't something that was actually meant to be danced to. It's just influences that Bach had from that style. So let's move on. We'll talk about a little bit the second sections. And fortunately, it doesn't start out as difficult as the first one, where we have this, these big stretches across the fingerboard. We start out with 2 open strings here, while holding the G in the bass, so, right? So when you play this G in the bass with these 2 open strings, you're gonna wanna have your pinky near the 3rd fret up here on the 2nd string, and your first finger near this F sharp. The two things that are coming next, right? So you don't want to have to do this, for instance. That's something in general throughout this piece that you're really just going to want to avoid. Anywhere where you have to hop and jump. There are some spots near the end here that we're going to get to where you are sort of forced to do that. But every opportunity that we can take where we don't have to do that, we're going to take, right? So here's one of them. We can already have these fingers nearby the places where they need to go. So these fingerings are pretty straightforward here. And notice my first finger here is having to travel up to this second string. Something I'm not doing is leaving it here and then making it fly. But as soon as I play this D and A together, where this first finger is now free, right? I'm moving it up to that second string. This is a perfect example of somewhere you can just slow down and practice and make sure you're getting that transition. See, you can take all the time in the world when it's slow to get your fingers to move properly and not snap. You know, when you hear someone say, when you hear someone say to a musician or to an artist, you make that look really easy, what they mean is that it looks effortless and it doesn't look like all these sudden movements and things that sort of signal panic in our mind, right? So this is where you can work on that skill. Make it easier for yourself and it'll appear easier to everyone else and it'll sound nicer, right? More legato, more connected. Okay, so we're moving to a more unfamiliar harmonic place. Okay, so we're moving from this C all the way up to this D with our second finger. So this is a little tricky. During this open string, my second finger is traveling up to the second string. This part's a bit straightforward. Let's go over that one more time. I'll play it slowly. O and 2, then 1. Then we're back to that same thing we started at the beginning of the piece, right? Then 4 and 1, same thing like we prepared here. Right, in that first measure of the B section, but we're doing it here. Right, we're just moving everything up a string, actually. That's kind of nice, so. Okay, so my second finger, you can see it's preparing to play this C in measure 10, the beat 1 of measure 10. Right? Okay, again. Preparing. All right. Then O, 3, 2, and 1, measure 10. That's that E major. You could also play that as a low E. Then you have the low E here at the end of measure 11, so it might be a little redundant to do it twice. Okay, we have that next thumb scale, right? Before we had that at measure 4, where we had... But here, it's a little bit easier because you don't have an active melody line. All you have is A ringing here on the third string in measure 12. Okay, so by the end of that line, especially since I'm not using my fourth finger, I'm getting my fourth finger ready for this D at the end of measure 12. Open D in the bass, so we've got octaves. Okay, this is exactly the same as in measure 9, right, at the beginning of the B section, going into measure 10. Finding my spot, okay. Again, another big movement of the second finger. It's kind of a theme in the second half, right? Our second finger is having to do a lot of work. So maybe in your music, every time you notice the second finger, like I'll try to find the first spot where it happens, but the second finger has to move in measure 10 a whole lot, right? From here. So that's from this C to this D right there in measure 10. I would circle that and, write like a little P next to it for practice. That's something that will end up saving your day later when you're, grinding through this piece and you've put in a lot of hours and that one thing is tangling you up. I bet that's going to be one of the things. Let's find those other spots. Okay, that is measure 13, right? Right on the downbeat of measure 13. Oh, no, sorry, not the downbeat. The last two beats of measure 13. We've got C against E there, just like in a few measures before. Circle out as well, right? Okay, next up, there's a lot of different ways to do this, and you'll see it played a lot of different ways. Some people move up to here. That sounds beautiful, maybe a little romantic, but for the Baroque time. I'm choosing to do this because my pinky, this is measure 14, by the way, that I'm referencing. When we move to this F sharp, I like doing this because my pinky is still on the first string and I just have to slide a few frets. This is another practice area. Circle that if you can. Make a mental note of it or come back and rewatch this on Jam Play's website. But that's something to get down. The alternative is, I suppose that's possible as well. Okay, so yeah, you could do this. You have this hop, which you heard me just buzz there. I'm not sure if that's the best. I think this works, also this works, but then you have to hop. I'm doing everything I can to not avoid, I'm doing everything I can to avoid making fingers jump or to make huge shifts. So this is one of the things I'm doing, right? And this works out so perfectly. Right, this is 1 and 3 on this A sharp and C sharp. And then I just slide, right? Both fingers just slide up. And you can see I've written down 1 and 3 here and 1 and 3. Then we've got another one of those lines, which is almost identical, just shifted up a whole step from, now we have, and it goes the opposite direction, right? So now this is tricky. You could do then, but I'm going to choose to play this D sharp here because that gets me right in position to do this. That way I don't have to do this. Which, come on, that's tough, right? If you're going full speed. See what happened to me this shit there? I just slipped off the fingerboard. So that way you can take a little bit of time here and you can have your fingers ready to do that difficult stretch. Again, it's one of these 2 against 3. So that's where you can practice, like I mentioned at the beginning of this, things like this. Just adjacent strings stretching and then moving on to a 1-string gap between the 2nd and 4th string, then between the 5th and 2nd. And take this slow. If this is your maximum for a little while, that's okay. Don't feel like you need to take it here right away, but eventually you're going to be asking your fingers to do things like that. So see if you can work towards that. So this D sharp is the 6th fret on the 5th string. Okay. Again, when you get to this D sharp, you can actually turn your hand to get this easily set up. Because if you do that from this position, look how hard it is to get your fingers there. If you just raise your hand a little bit like this, you just raise your elbow just a little bit, you can use that to your advantage. You don't often do that intentionally, but this is one of those situations where it really helps your hand out. Now I'm shifting. This is one of those moments where you sort of have to. You could also I thought about doing this one, but there's a lot of messing around on these second string up high. Action gets higher there. You're more likely to make this mistake. And then everything else takes place down here. So at some point, you just got to make your way back down into those lower positions. So I'm choosing to do it here. My fourth finger, again, just like we noticed in some previous measures, our fourth finger can just slide down a few frets. Use it as what we call a guide finger, going from one fret to another on the same string. Use it as a guide finger because it gets to just skate along that string rather than lift up and go to a new string, right? So, everything's pretty straightforward here. This is another spot where you want to have fingers prepared. 1 and 4 going here to this B and G. Okay? So, okay, this is a pretty difficult stretch, and there's some ways around this. This next one, this G against D, and then playing this F, this is bound to be hard. Now, you can do this and lift off of this G and make it staccato and just shift your hand to that F. But we're trying to connect these lines so that it sounds like this. Which is really nice. If you have this, it actually does sound good, right? But it's not intentional. So we try to avoid things like that. So I'm having to do this here. Now, you could do something like this, but see what I have to do? I have to hop this fourth finger from the first string to the second while stretching another finger out, which I find pretty hard. It's easier for me to do this stretch, but if this kind of stretch is impossible for you, then this is an option. 3 and 4 and 1 there, which this is so cozy to play, but it's not when you have to consider that you have to jump a finger to do that. So yeah, I'm not really singing alternative here. That works. Yeah, so okay, so going back to measure 19 here. That's nice. We've got an open A, and then again, now you have C sharp and F sharp here. Open E. My pinky, you can see it's instinctually trying to go to that next place that it needs to go. That D sharp, right? Another one of those bass lines, not bad at all because you have an open B ringing while you're doing this. So let's do that again, right at measure 20. And then right when you play that D sharp, this E, B comes in, right? The last 2 8th notes of measure 20. Then everything gets a little bit more difficult, right? Let's talk about that. Now we've got this really interesting mimicking line going on where we have that's what's going on in the bass line, but in the melody it's so it's the same thing, the same rhythm, but it's offset a little bit. The bass line goes and then it aligns with this upper line. So they're having this conversation. It's like da da dee da 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 dee, like this, but right on those last notes and the first notes, they're overlapping a little bit. You can see that at measure 21, right? Which just is the genius in Bach's writing here. It's so beautiful. It's such a cool way to wrap things up, is have these voices overlapping. Whereas in a lot of other parts of the piece, they worked alongside of each other, but they weren't overlapping much. Here they are, right? Overlapping. Now you are forced to do a jump here. I'm forcing you to do a jump. There's other ways to do this, but this is really the most simple way I could have come up with. So this is the first jump that I'm really suggesting, which is this first finger jumping to that C from the D sharp, like this. There is one other way, which is just barring. But then you have to play an open G. So it means you got a bar for an eighth note and then lift up. Which is a little goofy. It's a lot of work. So anyway, something you can try, but what I'm doing at the end of measure 21 here is... not the end of measure 21. The end of measure 21. Okay. D sharp to E. This is less of a jump because you have time on that open G to get your first finger down to F sharp. So circle that and make that a practice spot as well. By the way, before we close up here, please leave any comments that you may have in the comments wherever you are. If you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, Jam Play site, wherever you are, leave a comment and I'll try to get to it at the end of the stream and try to clear up anything. I know we're just sort of skimming through this, and it's a very short piece, but it's so dense that it's hard to follow along with something. So whatever your question may be about, hope to get to it. So this is that practice spot, right? From C to F sharp. Can you smoothly move your first finger to that second fret on the sixth string and land it? And perfect coordination, right? It's like a choreographed dance here. And can you do it without doing something like this with your pinky, right? That's the other thing. You got to keep the pinky relaxed and make sure that these are choreographed nicely. And usually something like this happens, your pinky sticks out, your hand arches, whatever. Those things happen because you haven't allowed your hands to understand these motions really slowly, right? I guarantee you it's a patience game here, just like a game of chess. You can do this relaxed. It just takes a little bit of time, right? The second you try to do it really fast, something interesting might happen in your hands. Just do it nice and slow, even if it means counting to 10 before making the next motion here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right? And allowing yourself to be really relaxed in those movements, especially these hard spots. There's not too many of them, right? Coming up next, measure 22 here. I'm sliding my pinky from the C sharp to the D sharp. That's the best way I can do it here. And it works out really nice because you've got an open string and then F sharp here that you can play with your second finger. So, and then 2 open strings. That's our saving grace there because we need a little bit of a break to get back in position for this F sharp, E, B against D sharp, right? Now I'm very particular with the fingering I use here at the end so that it's very legato. Okay, so 2 and 1, 1, 4, 2 and 0, right? I'm not jumping my first finger here because there's no need, right? My second finger is available. 4, 1, 1, right? And of course, that whole section repeats as well. Needless to say, that's where you would add an ornamentation. That's where you would do something a little bit different, try to show the audience a little bit of a different side to this music. Okay, so to wrap up here, some of the things that you're going to be wanting to really focus on here is just this left hand coordination and these stretches and keeping things legato in the bass line. What you're going to hear a lot of is this, like, where all these bass line notes are very, very short or inconsistent. Maybe you have an open note that really rings and the next one doesn't. So practice these bass lines alone. And make something of it musically. Right? So that way when you add everything together, not only do the bass lines connect, but they make more musical sense. Okay? And same goes for the ending here, because this is where you're going to be really tempted to make a really choppy sounding bass line. Right? So okay? Practice those lines separately. Take it slow. Circle spots that really need practice. And I think you'll make a lot of progress with this piece. Okay, so I'm looking forward to getting your questions here. So thanks so much for watching today. Leave your questions wherever you're watching right now in the comments and I'll get to them. Definitely tune in next week and the following weeks. We've got, I think, about 5 more weeks of this. So we'll be exploring some pieces that are much more simple. Next week's piece is, I promise, a little bit more simple than this week and a little bit more palatable, lots of arpeggios. I think you'll really enjoy. Thanks again for watching, and let's go ahead and get to some questions. All right, great. We've got some questions already here. So first question, what are some other suites like this? Great question. You know, Bach wrote 4 lute suites and then a ton of other individual pieces just for lute that are floating around out there. Search for the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th lute suite, but more importantly, listen to the rest of this lute suite, the 1st lute suite, right? We got a prelude, allemande, courant. I forget if this one is minuets, but then a gigue as well after this Bouree. So this isn't even the last movement of the suite. You've got one after it. So listen to this one through and through. It's really awesome. And try to listen to some lute harpsichord players and some lutenists play it. Nigel North records these. Yeah, there's a lot of really great recordings out there. So check those out. And listen to it on the native instrument. You know, of course, we love to hear it on guitar too. But it's really great to inform your performance to listen to other instrumentalists playing it, including keyboard players. You can hear keyboard players playing lute suites, and that's a really great idea too. What kind of guitar am I using is the next question. So this is a classical guitar. This one's made by Stephen Walter. He's based in Chicago, nearby the Chicago area, an American luthier. It's based on the Humphrey style. It's modified a bit, but you can see it has this raised fingerboard here. You can see the neck comes off of the guitar a good bit there. And that's so that you can reach the higher frets without doing something like a cutaway. It also has a different angle of pull on the soundboard. So instead of the strings running perfectly parallel, they actually have this little ramp to it, if you can see that. Then you can see I also have a grippy pad here. This thing is just a static Klingon pad that you would use like in a car for your phone to not slip around. But that helps it grip my leg. You know, 6 strings, standard length, 650 millimeters. 53 millimeter nut here. What did I say? 650 millimeter standard length here, and then 53 millimeter nut width. those are the nerdy guitar facts, but it's a classical guitar, nylon string, and it has a lattice bracing in here. It's not a double top, which you'll see in a lot of the very modern guitars. Some more things. I'll wait to see if there's any more questions here, so feel free to leave them so that we don't miss on these things. But yeah, other things about this guitar, I have this armrest. I get a lot of questions about this. It's not attached to the instrument, right? It's not a part of the guitar. It's a little piece of plastic here. It's called the Able Rest, although there's a lot of different alternatives to this. This thing's lasted me, wow, I think almost 4 years now, and it's dropped off of my guitar before. It's hit stages, it's hit concrete, I'm sure. So it's pretty hardy, and it just screws onto the side of the guitar with this little, with a simple little turnable screw here. And I say it falls off, but it hasn't fallen off many times. I'll say that. I mean, I made sure it's really on there. But you get pretty good at finding the spot, taking it off. Obviously, it can't fit in the case unless you have a giant guitar case. Can't fit in the case with this on there, but it provides just a little bit less of a harsh angle here on the side of the guitar. You know how electric guitars are. They have the little armrest cut away a lot of the times, and that makes it more comfortable. But we're trying to preserve the sound quality of the guitar and not cut too far into it with an acoustic instrument. So you'll see a lot of makeshift armrests. There's some really cool ones out there. This one's called the Able Rest, if I didn't mention that already. But yeah, this is a guitar made by Steve and Walter. I don't think we have any other questions here, but yeah, I want to encourage you to go listen to the other movements of this lute suite number 1. Check out the other lute suites by Bach. You're bound to find a lot of really awesome music. But thank you so much for watching. Next week, I believe, if I'm right, we've got, we're going to be going through a piece by Emilia Giuliani. It's going to be an arpeggio etude. It's a really nice piece that's not incredibly difficult, not as hard as this piece for sure. So I hope you'll join in, and thanks so much for watching.